Honestly, I never thought this would happen. Honestly, I wonder if anyone really did. And even if something resembling this did make it to release, I never expected it to be like this. I know you weren't expecting me to put out a video this year either. Hey, Fallout London's pretty cool too. Every year there are stories published and videos made about the new Fallout mod that will change everything. The Fallout mod situation is insane. New Fallout mod cinematic trailer release. There's always some massive project right around the corner, bringing the series to a new location with new weapons, factions, enemies, companions, and then you briefly wonder to yourself, how in the world are they gonna pull that off? And then usually they don't. You'll never hear about it again, or it'll be stuck in a cycle of yearly updates coping with ongoing development purgatory due to clashing creative visions, work schedules, and burnout. This is why Fallout London is so special. Fallout London is the full package, and for that reason it's new territory both for this channel and for the entire landscape of Fallout modding. It's a cliche to talk about modders making a new Fallout game. Outside the mods that exist for Fallout 1 and 2, I never honestly thought it would be possible anytime soon, but here we are. It's not a cliche if it's true. Fallout London is a new Fallout game, fresh with everything that implies. A new world to explore, characters to talk to, horrific creatures to shoot, and factions to join. This video is going to be an in-depth examination of as much of it as I can justify. If this video has a thesis, it's that Fallout London is a miracle. I'm going to critique this game for the game that it is, and I'm going to critique it a lot, but everything I have to say is couched in a sort of passive awe I have for it. My criticisms are partially criticisms I have for the game it was built from, and in my opinion didn't differentiate itself from enough in terms of its mechanics, that being Fallout 4. Other criticisms are criticisms unique to the way the mod is different from Fallout 4 in its pacing, the way it reveals its story, or the way it arranges its world space. But no matter what I have to say, I say it about something that is a miracle to exist in as good a state as it does, and something I have an overwhelming amount of respect and love for. Fallout London starts with a cinematic explaining how everything you're going to explore came to be. In particular, it highlights the differences in how the war which blew up the world shaped out in Europe. For example, instead of people surviving the nuclear war in Vault-Tec vaults like their American counterparts, the British hid in their own underground bunkers called Pindar stations. No gruesome experiments to be had, at least not in there. The cinematic also introduces some of the major players in London who will eventually be meeting, like the Tommies, a military faction, or the Fifth Column who... Oh no. The game proper starts with you waking up in a tube and being observed by two scientists who just happen to be voiced by Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy. Yeah, that's just like happening now.
Subject has been performing adequately.
No, Ace! Stay still! Will you stay still? You idiots! I don't know how many times I gotta tell you not to move! You move!
Nothing unusual.
I want to go deeper into the mechanics and leveling system later, but notable for now in character creation is the mod's reintroduction of traits. And some of these are taken from the other games, and some are new, like Puritan. A trait which increases your strength and endurance by 1 permanently, but reverses the effect if you use any drugs or alcohol. The other kind of traits are the ones from the other games that they've rebalanced, like the best trait in the game, Hoarder. In Old World Blues, this perk gave you extra carry weight with the caveat that if you aren't carrying enough, all of your special stats go down. In Fallout London, it's even better because it gives you the extra carry weight, but if you go over the limit, you literally can't move. Rather than just reducing your speed, being over-encumbered means you just stop. Which is really funny, but also overpowered as hell because who walks around over-encumbered anyway? I bring these two traits up, Puritan and Hoarder, because I think they both do the same thing by utilizing an understanding of player behavior to justify meaningful buffs. Some players don't really use chems or alcohol anyway, and nearly every player doesn't spend enough time over-encumbered to feel the negative effects of having Hoarder. But therein lies the difference and why I think Puritan is a much better model for what a trait in a Fallout game ought to be. Puritan is a trait which acknowledges a way in which some players already play these games, recognizes that way of playing as suboptimal, and provides buffs to that playstyle to make it more than just lazy. Now, players who don't use chems, regardless of their extreme benefits, can be on par in power level with players who do. And players who were more likely to use chems in a run have a unique playstyle option they can opt into in a second playthrough. Hoarder, on the other hand, acknowledges a way that pretty much everyone already plays the game. That is not going around over-encumbered, even though technically you can, and just straight buffs it at no real cost. There isn't any difference in playstyle between a Hoarder spect character and a non-Hoarder spect character because every player already plays like they have the trait enabled by dropping stuff immediately whenever they get over-encumbered. I think the mod does just enough with its character creation to differentiate itself from base Fallout 4 by re-adding traits and putting in a load of new appearance customization options, but I think not all of the traits are perfect or improvements on their counterparts from other games. We'll see this more when we take a look at the game's perks and leveling systems, but for now, the facility you're being held in is broken into, and you're able to slip out in the chaos. Along the way, you can meet some of the new enemies, these rats that look like they could get me demonetized if I told you what they look like, and you also get your hands on the game's Pip-Boy, the Attaboy, cleverly designed in lore as an experimental knockoff. When I said you could slip out in the chaos, that may have been an incomplete telling of events, because more accurate is to say that you're allowed to leave, allowed by a mysterious figure who, rather than letting you out as some act of benevolence, clearly sees this escape as a way to test you. This will not be the last you hear from him, and his call sign is heard everywhere in the mod.
It seems I neglected to introduce myself. I'm Mr. Smythe. Since I'm all for giving one a sporting chance, I've unlocked the doors. Go, and remember, mind the gap.
This escape leads to a train station where we can get a view of the new world space before crashing. No, not like that, but while it's on your mind, let's talk about it briefly. One of the things you'll notice first about Fallout London's world map is how urban it is. A good majority of the mod takes place in super dense urban environments, which makes it an absolute wonder how it manages to keep as stable as it does. London has a good handful of areas that stutter pretty badly even after the post-release patches, but my perspective on the performance of the mod is that the areas that cause lag cause reasonable lag. What I mean by that is that this engine is an abomination, and so of course my frames are going to get cut in half if you have a part of the map with a lot of physics objects, or super dense particle effects, or 1600 wandering NPCs at once. I feel this way about Fallout New California too. That mod had a lot of big battle scenes where the player would be running around an area with tens of combatants all firing weapons and moving around, and those fights were often pretty brutal on performance, but does that fact mean that the devs shouldn't have added parts of the mod like that? Fallout London is the same thing. There are parts of the mod that kind of chug, but when playing through it, you know exactly why it's chugging, and the reason why is the reason why that if frames were stable, you'd be praising the area without any caveats whatsoever. So performance is way more stable than I expected overall, but in the areas where it is unstable, I think it's mostly okay that it is that way. I expect more and more patches to keep rolling out fixing these areas, but as is, I'm not altogether too pressed about it. On the matter of bugs, they exist, and in the start of my playthrough I ran into a few that were fully quest breaking, but they were patched within a week. The developer Discord is a phenomenal resource to keep an eye on if you're playing through the mod. The dev team and community have been nothing but helpful in taking note of and providing solutions for major bugs while they work on patching them out of the game entirely. Speaking overall about the technical state of this mod though, there is no mod that exists at this mod's scale. Even the Frontier isn't quite as big as this, but even out of the mods that come the closest, none of them are as stable as this one. This doesn't, however, mean that the mod feels like a professionally made product. The main reason for this isn't that it's unfinished or buggy or anything like that, but a thing I noticed all over the mod are little things that feel like they are put there for the developers and nobody else. This happens in professional games too. I think Fallout 1 and 2 have a ton of this, but it definitely makes the whole experience feel less professional. Professionality is overrated though, because it means they left in stuff like this.
The new skin procedure is a marvelous mix of cutting-edge technology. Oh my god, I can't. I'm going insane.
Hey, Editor Jackson here. They patched these. Fucking cowards. The other not blank enough often levied at the prospect of this mod alongside not professional enough is not Fallout enough, which is a can of worms I want to get open early so I can get the topic over with before we get into the serious plot and gameplay stuff. The elephant in the room of every discussion of this mod is its setting. It's a pretty standard opinion, even voiced by Todd himself, that Fallout as a franchise is something uniquely American, that the world of Fallout was designed for the United States, and to spend prolonged time outside the US would be to break some sacred rule. The popular community perception seems to be something along the lines of, it would be interesting, but it wouldn't be Fallout.
Look, my view is part of the Fallout shtick is on the Americana naivete, and part of that
It's not a point I fully disagree with. I like the United States as a setting for those games, and if you gave me control of Bethesda solely so I could dictate whether or not the next Fallout game was in the US or elsewhere, I'd probably just let it be and tell them to keep exploring the US, even if it means another game with super mutants where they don't belong and the Brotherhood of Steel for some reason. Fallout London challenges this idea for obvious reasons, and so I think it's valuable to investigate the changes it makes, which make it distinctly not American, and whether or not those changes make it quote-unquote not Fallout. What is Fallout? What makes Fallout Fallout? How many times can I say Fallout in this video before the word loses all meaning entirely and I succumb to my latent psychosis? These are all questions worth asking. A lot of the things missing from Fallout London are the aesthetic signs of Fallout, the things you'd put on merch or sell as Funko Pops. No super mutants, no rad scorpions, none of the pre-existing factions, no vaults, and to a lot of people's dismay, no power armor. Well, none that you can wear anyway. A lot of people liked Fallout 4's power armor, I definitely did, but in playing Fallout London, I actually didn't really feel like I missed it. The game was always balanced enough that I never felt like it was needed, and it didn't play a role for other characters or factions, so it kinda slips out of your mind. In a game where one or more of the major factions isn't entirely clad in power armor, I never really got the FOMO of not having it myself. This is how I feel about pretty much all of the aesthetic signs that people tend to claim make Fallout Fallout, the type of things that would make London an unsuitable location for a Fallout game. No bottle caps, no Brotherhood of Steel, no vaults, no Americana advertising or American cultural signifiers. Do I like these things? Sure. Do I miss them when I play Fallout London? Absolutely not. I don't even think about them because the game's given me more than enough to go on my plate in their stead. Fallout London lacks the signs and symbols, it lacks the setting and some of the aspects of Fallout's house style, but not for a second did I feel like this wasn't a Fallout game. What makes Fallout Fallout is a question for an entire video and one the community as well as the developers of the games are constantly having to reckon with. Bethesda had to reckon with it after their purchase of the IP and their imagining of Fallout 3, which was in a lot of ways different to the originals but still retained its visual aesthetic signs. Bottle caps, super mutants, the Brotherhood, the Enclave, Herald, all of it is back, but it's different. It plays different, its writing, its tone is different. Fallout London seemingly took the opposite approach in its adaptation of the IP, insofar as it retains very little from the previous games visually, while still maintaining the feel, the writing, and the tone of its predecessors, especially and probably obviously Fallout 4. There are total conversion mods for Bethesda games which completely and totally alter the game feel from their originals, but this is not one of them. Save for a good amount of mechanical differences, which affect especially the early game, this feels like Fallout 4. You're exploring, you're looting, you're roaming around doing quests and listening to the radio. The writing is satirical and darkly comedic, and there are skeletons arranged neatly in bathroom stalls and in front of old televisions. Fallout is Fallout. I shouldn't let it go unstated though, a frankly ridiculous amount is changed here visually. Probably the best initial place to start is the mod's food and its medicines, a staggering amount of which are either renamed or entirely new. Almost all of the mod's drugs are altered to fit the new local scene. Stimpaks Radaway and Radex survive, but in place of Jet is Hero. Instead of Psycho, there's Hypo, you get the gist. Just as with the mod's drugs, this is equally true with its food, all of which leaves an even bigger lasting impression as world building. The food items have a tough job here because they have to do multiple things at once. The food items sometimes act as British parallels to things that exist in the American Fallout games, but they also have to, like the food from those games, reflect an imagined pre-war culture of pre-war Brits, and then also represent what food survives once that culture is shot to hell. But harder than any of these, the mod has to make the player willing to eat British food. One point of criticism I've heard about Fallout London's aesthetic is that it isn't fully set in one specific time. When you play one of the official games, especially 3 and forward, you get a very clear picture that what you're seeing from and about the pre-war world relates to eras in our own. It's very 50s. I bring it all up so I can bring up Fallout London's points of incongruity in good faith. There are a lot of little aesthetic things that don't really fit in the world space as it was written. Some of these are modern holdovers like Fesco or the most easily maligned Vault Zon. This is kind of cheeky, but it's there and obvious if you want to point at something and go, hey look, guys, look, it's not Fallout. It's not Fallout, it's being amateurish, Mom,
look, it's not Fallout. Are you watching? Are you watching? Why aren't you moving?
In the Elder Scrolls, it's a running bit to start the game in a prison, and in Fallout, I think it's safe to say by now that it's a running bit to start the game with a quest to find someone. In Fallout 2, you sort of get this with the early quest to find Vic. In Fallout 3, your dad, New Vegas, it's Benny, 4, it's your son, and 76, it's the Overseer. Or was, I guess. I don't know what's going on with that game. Also, I'm being told the word I'm looking for is perhaps trope, or maybe motif, and not, running bit? You know, I'm really kind of getting good at this YouTube thing, huh? Fallout London starts the same way, with the search for the mysterious man in the suit and hat, but what I always find interesting is the ways in which different Fallout games make you want to go on this hunt. For example, sometimes they just don't. In 2 in New Vegas, the early goal of finding a specific individual can be plot justifiably ignored on purpose to maximize player freedom. Maybe you don't want to go after the man that shot you in the head. In 3 and 4, the main plot can be ignored even more easily, but to the detriment of immersion. It makes no sense why the player in those games wouldn't drop everything to find their family. This has been beaten to death, but what's interesting is that Fallout London takes a unique approach to encouraging the player to push through the main story through the use of mechanical incentives. The intro to Fallout London tells you very little. You get your way out of a sinister lab with a sinister Freemasony logo, interact with a sinister faceless individual with a sinister jingle, and you know what? That there's science going on? That you're a part of it? That's it? So how does the game get you to care? You're injured. The side effects of whatever they were doing to you, combined with the immediate effects of being in a train crash, mean you do 10% less damage in combat and take 10% more. The way to remove these status effects are solely gated by main quest progression. The game is fully playable in this weakened state, and I would even go as far as to say that the most fun I had with Fallout London's gameplay was had before removing these negative effects. But naturally, as a player affected by a negative status effect, you want to get rid of them. I will be very critical when we get more into the story about how little is revealed before the final third, but for at least the first fifth, you know exactly as much as you need to know to remain interested. And more importantly, you have enough incentive beyond that intrigue to follow the main quest. The only bit of story I want to mention here is the introduction of the Vagabonds. If you'll recall, the chaos of the lab was caused by a break-in, and after the train crash you get to meet the men responsible only to discover they're a Cockney, Peaky Blinders-style street gang called the Vagabonds. This isn't at all related, but this was the moment in my first stream of Fallout London that I discovered the player could smoke cigarettes. So I assume I can smoke since there's 1 out of 14. Yes, I can. Anyway, they give you 2 options, left to a place called Thames Haven or right with them. Both ways are implied to have an equal chance of getting you where you need to be. This is just not true. Thames Haven is the only route that advances the main plot, but more importantly here is that initially this choice is framed as a binary one. You think that the game is making you pick an alliance, asking you whether you trust these people. In reality, whatever direction you go, the other option will be waiting for you the moment you decide to stop pursuing the path you had previously chosen. I don't necessarily think the story would have been improved had one path been gated fully by initially pursuing the other, but I think just a little bit more reactivity to your choice would have been nice. If you're going to give the player a choice this clearly framed as a capital D decision, maybe it would have been nice to add some kind of penalty in one questline for doing the other one first. Before we explore either of these paths though, I want to talk about the game's early combat and its broader gameplay. No matter what choice you make with the Vagabonds, their leader, a gruff man named Sebastian Gaunt, gives you a butterfly knife to keep yourself safe on the streets. This is, first off, a really well animated weapon. This game has a lot of new, unique weapons, but this is by far my favorite visually. Maybe it's just because it reminds me of CSGO surfing. Anyway, my point with bringing up the butterfly knife is that this is a weapon that thankfully you will be somewhat forced to use for the first while, as Fallout London's first few hours are pretty melee focused. The early game of Fallout London is by a long stretch the most mechanically fun part of the whole experience, and for a long time I kept on wondering why. The conclusion I reached on the second playthrough was a pretty simple one, and one that applies to such a staggering number of open-world action RPGs that I'm shocked so few games have managed to find a way to fix it. resource scarcity, and systems engagement. In the early game of Fallout London, bullets are pretty scarce. They aren't objectively that scarce, and neither are healing items, but due to the damage changes, you go through these items a lot faster, so you're out of them a lot more often. What does this mean for the early gameplay loop? You actually have to think about your consumables, about each item in your toolkit thoughtfully. In my first run, I thought the game was going to be melee dominated for the whole thing because of how England's gun culture differs from America.
Well, at least our schools are not a shooting gallery!
What do you call cigarettes?
It makes sense why so few guns are around here. But no, there are guns, and a lot of them, and instead of doing the more interesting thing of keeping the melee focus going throughout the game, maybe limit gun builds to Tinkerer-style characters who can build their own guns and ammo. After about 4 hours, you can fully spec into guns and never really worry. I wish more games had the willingness to keep resources scarce even after a player hits level 10. There is something to be said about player power progression. Really putting my pop filter to use, Jesus. And I think that's definitely important. The player should feel stronger the further they go into the game. In the early hours of my playthrough, I fought through Fesco and met this. My dog. Oh, holy fuck. Ah, I hate looking at that. Oh my god, no, that's okay. Yep. And hours later, I needed a little more XP so I could level my charisma up to pass a quest check, and so I went back. Yeah, there we go, now I level. In another encounter, I wasn't able to beat a particularly strong boss enemy, so I found a way to abuse its pathing so I could keep hitting it without getting one shot. Fuck me, man. Oh shit.
I've been roaming around, always looking down at all I see.
Haha, I know how you're patterned now. This is the most fun I ever had in the combat gameplay of Fallout London. I had to get creative, I had to learn, I had to adapt, I had to grow, and yes, I had to cheese. This is what classic Fallout was all about, getting wiped, getting stronger, and beating enemies you used to be scared of. I'm afraid to say that in Fallout London, after Act 1, there are no enemies you'll need to be scared of, save for a few rare world bosses. You are not consistently threatened. You get enough items, ammo, and money that you don't need to switch weapons that often. You don't need to use your chems or eat your beans. This is especially true if you find the best weapon in the game at the end of Act 1, returns policy. I don't know if this is numerically the best weapon in the game. It honestly probably isn't, but it's sure as hell the best one I found, because as soon as I found it, I went, "Is that a bug?" Editor Jackson again. Yes, it was, but it still rocks. Kudos to the devs for having such a cool array of unique weapons. I always preferred this approach to base Fallout 4's more radiant legendary system. A lot of Fallout London's best items are pretty hidden, such that I've seen some players complain that they never find unique weapons or armor in the open world, completely self-reporting the fact that they're just not really paying attention. This serves as a pretty reasonable incentive to keep your eyes open in the locations you're exploring, but I wish this incentive was a lot more survival-driven than curiosity-driven. Exploring should not be optional for any player, especially in a world as worthy of being explored as this one. I'm gonna cover the Thames Haven path because unfortunately it's the only one that really pushes the main plot along. If you follow the Vagabonds, you get a really valuable monologue about the different factions and groups in this world.
The gentry rule from their ivory towers, pissing off their pedestals from Westminster. Forget trying to get in there. Those gates are tighter than a duck's arse. Why are they so tight, you ask? Because they've got the Tommies to defend them. Powerful enough to take the peace, too stupid to keep it. Which means the occasional toe rags crop up and have a punt at blighty leadership. This brings me to the dress-up factions. Take your pick. Camelot, the only Tin Man Knights in Wandsworth, or if you fancy painting it black, you've the Fifth Column Tyrants in Tower Hamlets. Next on the list, you've the twats in the periphery, hooligans that'll smack you, beefeaters that reach you, jack tars who'll stick a cannon up your arse, roundels in Hackney. Well, they keep to themselves unless you've got a thing against scooters. Miller's men are the slapheads over in Islington. Neighbouring next to them are the Pistols in Camden who want anarchy in the UK. All of that makes sense. So, as life dictates, you should probably stick with us. Know what I mean?
But you're led onto a side faction questline fully unrelated to the main story. It's a pretty damn good one, as we'll get to later, but unfortunately it's not the main quest, and there's pretty much nothing to tell you it isn't. So in the interest of advancing the main quest, we'll talk a little bit about Thames Haven and its unique inhabitants. These are essentially a race of people mutated by the water in the River Thames, water so radioactive it kills you pretty much instantly. When I first met these characters, I had assumed they would take the place of ghouls one for one, but as it turns out, ghouls do actually still exist in this world, and the Thames folk are a different group entirely. In my live stream, I heard a lot of criticism of the visual and audio aspects of these characters, specifically people pointing out that it looks kind of strange for them to look like that while still having fully intact hair. The other complaints seem to just be that they found their voices annoying, but I've heard that said about the base game ghouls, so really there just isn't any winning here.
Where do I even start? Some say it's the neck folds.
I say, fuck that.
I like that the Thames folk are all able to be differentiated without the gimmick of them just having a unique outfit. The visual design of the mod's enemies and characters is really top-notch in this, just broadly. A big challenge for any project of this kind is to try and match the design of the various creatures of the wasteland. Some still remain, like the roaches, but for every retained creature is a similar but new one, like the ladybird. These things scare me. Not as much as the leeches, though. Whoa, 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 whoa. I do not, okay. They gotta stop putting shit like that in here. I don't like it. I don't like it. No! No! Act 1 of Fallout London is pretty similar in structure to a lot of the other Fallout's early games. You go to an area, and that area has something you need, either information or an item or a person, and you do that area's quest or task or errand before you get a little bit more of the plot. My issue with this structure as it exists in Fallout London is the ratios here. On a first playthrough, I had a lot of fun. I had an interesting time seeing all the landmarks, new creatures, enemies, and minor factions. The novelty sells Act 1 really well until it doesn't, and on a second playthrough you're spending 40 minutes doing side missions between 10-minute story hints, like that Mr. Hatton's suit, Smythe, has a lot of power and engages in cloning. The lab sections you're led to here are really fun and atmospheric and at times really creepy, but the moment you see the cloning thing, if you're clever, you'll have already figured out the entire plot by this point. But then in your head you'll go, but that can't be it, right? That'll be a mid-story twist, and then there'll be more, right? Right?
No!
A common criticism I've heard about the Fallout London world space is that it has no central towns. In every mainline Fallout game, the world map is almost a kind of obstacle in itself between pockets of civilization, little quartered off towns or settlements where all of your quests and vendors are. Diamond City, Megaton, Vegas, down to Fallout 1's very apt the hub. That's what these all are at the end of the day, and they serve their purposes as points of convenience. Fallout London does away with this in favor of a much more scattered system of settlements. Unlike any of the other Fallout games, the map is almost all city, and as such, there are no cities within the cities. London feels more realistic. If you want to meet this faction, they're in this borough. If you want to trade, there are a whole load of different places to go. There are traces of active life and civilization everywhere, as opposed to being confined in 1 to 6 pockets of civilization in a sea of violence and incivility. Westminster, just like the big democratically run trading hub, Trafalgar Square you cross by getting there, is just one area in which your needs as a player can be met. But to do these things is not the design goal of the area. The area is the area. It's a space for story, for gameplay, for world building, or if you're in Westminster, it's a space to show off visually and technically what can be done. This is the most busy area of NPCs I've seen in one of the 3D Fallout games. It feels a lot like the Vegas Strip if all of the technical restrictions that stopped that area from being what it could have been were bypassed. Only certain people are allowed to enter, it's much more lively, clean, and well lit than the rest of the wasteland, and there's some ominous character secretly in control of it all who you're here to find. Unfortunately, the player doesn't actually get to meet Smythe here like I was expecting. You don't get the Benny or Mr. House style confrontation on enemy turf here, but what you do get is a really fascinating look into the life of the aristocratic gentry class. Whoever Smythe is, he has used his power to re-establish old world class relations enforced by an army in the Tommies. He even brought back child labor. I wonder who Smythe actually turns out to be. Whoever he is, he's got to be like the worst, most irredeemable. Oh, hey, look, Fallout London's leveling system is an interesting case study into how these mods are shaped by the games they're built in. Because unfortunately, Fallout London's leveling system seems to have inherited many, if not all, of the flaws of Fallout 4's system. The one area in which London seems to have made consistent and tangible improvements on Fallout 4's system is the menu itself. If I had to summarize what the leveling system is actually like before going in depth, it's like if you took Fallout 4's perks and put them in Fallout 3 and New Vegas's perk menu. Actually, no, it's exactly that. That's what this is. Aside from a few port overs from previous games like Lady Killer or Explorer, this system is just Fallout 4's system with a more RPG looking menu. You put points into your special stats, which allow you to pick from a variety of perks gated by those special stats and your level. This is a sort of reductive framing because the new menu does help a lot with readability, and the inclusion of some of New Vegas's perks is appreciated. Also, I like how the mysterious stranger is James Bond. That's great. A lot of people tend to believe that Fallout 4's leveling system is a straightforward downgrade from New Vegas and even 3's systems. My perspective on that is kind of complicated. In the old system, you picked skill points and perks, but in Fallout 4, the more boring advancements that you would have numerically made in skills towards increased gun damage or ability to lockpick are all now shiny perks. Bethesda realized, I think correctly, that the perks were the fun, exciting part of leveling up, and the skills were more of a formality. And then they figured that if perks are the most fun part, why not make them the only part? This is kind of like if you thought that the fun part of your job was your lunch break and the actual work kind of sucked. So your solution is that you eat your lunch really slowly at your desk while you do your work all day. Problem solved. Infinite lunch. What Fallout 4's system does is essentially make the work more tedious because you're doing it slower, and also make the lunch less flavorful because you now have to trudge through your spreadsheets while you eat it. Skills were an important mechanic. They allowed for vital progression in parts of the games that do matter but which can't really be expressed in more fun ways than the numerical increases that they are. Perks like Confirmed Bachelor aren't interesting because of the damage bonus, they're interesting because of the dialogue and role-playing significance they provide. They change how you see and play the game. The frustrating part is that Fallout 4 has perks like these. It has perks that give you new abilities and options in gameplay and story, but they're almost always gated behind the second or third level of those perks. For example, my first playthrough of London was melee focused, and I loved the upper levels of big leagues, which allow you to disarm enemies or hit multiple enemies at once. What I didn't love is that I had to buy a boring % damage increase first. Here's my charitable reading though. I think what Bethesda had intended with Fallout 4 that actually goes a little bit under the radar in big think pieces like this is that it's actually the crafting systems which are meant to take the place of skills. If you think about it a little, it kind of makes sense. Instead of dumping points into numbers and buying perks, you dump resources you find in the world into your weapons, armor, and clothing and still retain the fun part of leveling, perks, while getting those numerical increases through each gun and armor's stats and effects. It's actually a pretty clever solution to making player power progression engaging. It's not a perfect system, and I do really miss the perks, but it's something. Speaking of the crafting system, one thing you will immediately notice if you play Fallout London next to Fallout 4 or with Fallout 4 in mind is the decisive benching of the settlement system. When Fallout 4 came out, the settlement system was of particular importance when it came to the game's marketing and its DLC. The best mechanical innovation of Fallout 4 might be the power armor, but the one that defines the game is undoubtedly settlement building. One of the game's most major and important factions, the Minutemen, doesn't make any sense without this mechanic. Players made a lot of hay about the Minutemen's focus on helping settlements, but an honest question I've never properly had answered is what the Minutemen would have been without these radiant diversions. What and who are the Minutemen without helping and building settlements? What's their deal without this mechanic? The vague concept of helping people? The faction just falls apart. Not only is the settlement system a big part of the game's story, it also gets its fingers in the mechanical loop of the game, as I mentioned with the player progression curve. This system is everywhere in Fallout 4, it is what I think of when I think of that game, and feels like what the entire thing was built around. In Fallout London, it kind of feels like an afterthought. That's okay, I don't often find myself missing the settlement system, but it's definitely worth noting as something that does mechanically separate this game from the game it came came out of. Scavenging materials for gun and armor mods is still important, the exploration, crafting, combat loop of the game is still fully intact, but you don't really feel like it's going toward anything other than the clothes on your back and the gun in your hand. One big part of this is that you don't need a garage for your power armor because there is no power armor, but beyond that, the settlement system doesn't really feel necessary. The world is still blown to bits, but I don't think, either in its aesthetics or its story, that rebuilding the world seems to be a main thematic priority like it did in the American Wasteland. There are settlements to be found, my favorite being the one on this bridge with the view, but there is very little in the game pointing you towards engagement with settlements in the way 4 was always pushing you to. This is an interesting change that, like with the removal of power armor, feels like it was fundamental to 4, but that I don't actually miss all that much in London. Back to the plot, there's a lot to do in Westminster and a lot to see, but we're here on a quick visit to Smythe at the Palace of Westminster. Unfortunately, however, they won't let us in unless we invoke a specific niche law that allows us entry if we have signatures of each of the leaders of London's many boroughs. There is a way to bypass this by paying for forgeries, but this is by far the most fun part of the game's story, so I have no idea why you would do that. Are you getting the sense that Fallout London's plot feels kinda weird? It's not bad, like everything that's there mostly makes sense and is interesting, but throughout the first 70% of my playthrough I never really felt, like, driven, I guess? Once Act 1 ends and you fix your conditions, very little else is explained to you. This stays this way well into the rest of the game. You don't get an answer as to who Smythe is or exactly what he's doing until the last few hours of the game, and even that's charitable. This is where it hit me. The game does its plot sections backwards. In pretty much every mainline Fallout game, the general structure is the exact same. The protagonist, our player, has some personal or community-related task. Find the water chip, find Benny, find your son, etc. The player is pushed to do this goal for themselves, and through trying to get this goal done, they learn about the world more broadly, what's going on around them, and who the bigger players in the region are. As soon as their initial task is concluded, they are catapulted by circumstance into a wider, more grand struggle between major factions in the area. This sounds obvious, like Joseph Campbell obvious, but what's important here is that Fallout London's plot does this backwards. For this quest to get into the palace, you need to meet a pretty decently large list of local minor factions and gain their trust in a very similar way to how it works in New Vegas's wildcard side bets. Once you make it past the palace, you do your lot of quests before gaining access to the major factions of the region, Camelot, the Fifth Column, and Smythe's own Angel program. But even if you pick Smythe's faction, you still don't get answers regarding your own personal mission until the major factional struggle has basically already been concluded. If New Vegas emulated what Fallout London's plot is paced like, the player would have to meet and gain the trust of the Brotherhood, Cons, White Glove Society, Boomers, and all the rest of them, as well as join one of the major factions and fight to the Battle of Hoover Dam before ever meeting Benny and figuring out what the Platinum Chip did. Can you imagine how insane that would be? I am being slightly uncharitable here, because just the simple fact that London is different doesn't make it bad. Following this formula isn't required for a good Fallout game, but I still think it's interesting to consider the idea that there might be a reason that these games do it like this. The main one for me is that in my first playthrough of London, I was constantly spending half my time feeling like the middle of the game was useless, for what felt like forever, conveying information and plot not relevant to the one driving motivation my character has, finding out who we are and who Smythe is. The other half of the time, I kinda just let it all go. I find myself completely focused on this less relevant part of the story, fully wrapped up in the stories of Camden or Brickton, fully forgetting why I was here at all. Those were the most enjoyable parts of the game story-wise, but I wish I enjoyed them in the context of a wider plot I had some reason to care about. Camden is my favorite location in the game, but if you know anything about me, you would have been able to figure that out pretty easily. So much of Fallout London takes inspiration from different aspects of British culture and history, and often these things fly right over my head. However, one that Brits successfully imported across the pond is the culture of punk. Camden is an ode to this culture, its people, its ideas, its music, and all of its other eccentricities. This is worth bringing up right here. The passive remarks of the NPCs in Camden are some of the game's best in my opinion. Multiple times I had to stop just to listen or stop to laugh after I passively overheard something which reminded me of myself or a lot of the people I knew in college.
Not now, it's too early, and I'm too hungover to talk about theory with you.
Camden's most interesting quests have to do with the inherently gripping subject of resource production and distribution. I'm being serious, did you think that was a joke? As essentially an open commune, they farm their own food and purify their own water, and all of it is free to members of the Pistols, the Burroughs faction. The quest involves grappling with this ethical dilemma that's similar in a lot of ways to how New Vegas treats the energy situation at the Helios 1 power station, with the added complication that a faction's ideals are at stake. Like all of the best factional quests in these games, it challenges the faction's beliefs in a realistic way. What is more important for a new up-and-coming group of wasteland survivors? The ideals which brought them together and which guide their leadership, or the tangible limitations of applying those ideas fully? One thing I would have loved to have seen from Camden is a sort of like poser quest, someone to accuse someone else of being a phony and for conflict to arise. I have no place I'm going with this other than Brickton, a town which is kind of just that. You think you're some experimental, weird, quirky group who farms their own food and keeps to themselves? Get real, I bet you don't even eat rocks. This is Canyon Folk territory, poser. Name 15 songs by the Glorious Chasm. Brickton is a group I love for its absurdity and very little else. This is a very Fallout TM faction in that it's bizarre, it's funny, and its quest is compelling. Brickton is a faction of people who live simple lives for the very simple reason of why not? What has technology and civilization gotten us so far? Might as well eat rocks and pray to the god of the canyon. Their leader, Roach, is a madman wearing a Skyrim helmet, his underwear, and a big cape.
Hi there, would you like to sign my petition?
The truth is, I don't remember who I was before I became Roach. I wanted a clean start, so I erased my memory through a mix of hallucinogenics and minor head wounds. And I'd do it again, if I remembered the recipe.
Sign this petition or I'll follow you home and kill your dog.
I've kind of neglected to talk about the Tommies in this video because they're honestly pretty nondescript. They're kind of like if the NCR weren't a faction in themselves so much as a fighting force for a different group. Stripped of an ideology in themselves, the Tommies exist as a basic military fighting force, an arm of Westminster, the Gentry. They're here, just outside Brickton, because they want to path through Brickton to a different settlement, Croydon. You do this for them in exchange for Brickton's independence, forging your path through the lava-filled canyon to find an even more insane and remote settlement hidden there. Everyone in Croydon speaks in broken Shakespearean English.
Indeed. Shut both thine eyes. What dost thou see? Dost thou take me in jest? Be I a fool?
You return to the Tommies, find out they were lying about giving Brickton independence, and figure out if you really give a damn about them enough to inform Roach of this. If you do, you get a much longer span of quests where you play pranks on the Tommies until they say fuck it and go away, like doing some graffiti or putting laxatives in their food, or holding up their supply caravan as the Brixton Shadow. It's all really fun and engaging and silly in the way a lot of Fallout towns are. Miller's Men is a faction I had basically no expectations for going into their quest. Up to this point, their representatives have been boring, almost raider-type characters who attack you on sight. They are a faction called Miller's Men, led by a guy named Miller. All of them look pretty much identical, which is backed up by their influences from British skinhead gangs, but regardless, it's not screaming creativity in the way the Pistols did. And in one aspect I was right, this faction is pretty astoundingly boring, but what I didn't expect was for its quest to be so strong. Not even by comparison, this quest isn't good for its faction, it's just straight up really good. For Camden, the way you get a signature is to join their faction and gain their leader's trusts, but no such option exists for Miller unless you join one of the game's major factions, which you aren't able to do at this point. Anyway, he proposes a one-and-done deal. You do a task for him, he signs your petition, you hopefully never see each other again. Fair enough. Miller has you running an errand to repay a life debt he owes to someone from his past. This quest in itself is a good dungeon, but what I was struck by with this quest was the emotional tragedy of it. You're in this airport to lay to rest the man's wife, who had long gone feral. The one wish this man had was to know before he dies that his wife doesn't have to endure being a feral ghoul any longer. Doing this for him is a delicate and emotional task, but what makes the quest even stronger in this aspect is returning to find that in the time you'd been gone, the man himself had died, only a cross remaining atop his bed. You go out to his gravestone for a second before returning to Miller, the whole ordeal making me feel a lot more than I figured anything involving this faction ever could. It's unironically really strong. But that's that, and we're off to their rival in the Roundels of Hackney. Roundel is an exceptionally British word, which I had to Google in order to understand the subculture the faction bearing its name came from. Turns out a roundel is a symbol of the Royal Air Force, adopted as a fashion symbol of the mod movement of Britain in the 60s. I guess calling this a mod faction would be a little redundant, but not that kind of mod as in modernist. These groups were known for rolling around on Vespas looking quite silly and doing a ton of amphetamines. This is a subculture that truly could not have existed outside of 60s Britain. In Fallout London, they take their fashion very seriously, and their whole area is marked by a red line running through the streets, indicative of a racetrack for the hypothetical Vespas. This all only really makes up the paint of the faction, literally, I guess, because the substance of this group exists in their conflict with the Miller's men over their territory and the crisis of leadership emerging from this ongoing battle. The Roundels were originally led by two brothers, but in one of their bigger scuffs, Miller killed one of the brothers in front of the other, giving the now alone prince severe PTSD he copes with through self-medication. Here's what I like about the Roundels before I get into the gripes I have. I like the amount of choice you have in what is essentially a classic leadership struggle questline. Help X or Y character gain power could have been a pretty easy binary choice, a la so many choices in these games, but there are different layers of choices within the way you lean. That choice really is just that, a lean, which when shit hits the fan and you're kidnapping the prince for Manchester Mike or buying drugs for him to overdose on for Dennis, you can go back on, changing your allegiance and moving back to the other character's way of things. I like how Machiavellian this questline is, how it portrays grayness as inherent to a drive for leadership and power. Oh yeah, also I like the prince. That's it, I just like him, I think he's neat.
The Tide Turner, the wandering wrong number, the battle brazen ball buster of Miller's men. Come in, come in.
You might be coming on a bit strong, my prince.
Fuck.
Unfortunately, the Roundels fall into a classic Bethesda game-style trap of having the player inexplicably fall into a faction, and before you know it, they're making pivotal choices surrounding it and its leadership. The questline begins with you helping two people out of a fight with the Miller's men, and them immediately more or less enlisting you into the gang without much of an explanation as to what the gang is or what their goals are. You then meet Dennis and fight with him and a bunch of other Roundels against a bunch more of Miller's men, at which point you are declared the hero of the battle, even if you do it like I did and just kind of let the scene play out until there's only a few people left to shoot. After this battle, you're thrown right into the faction's leadership race and tasked with extremely sensitive information and highly fuck-upable tasks. And I'm still wondering, what the hell is a roundel? This is not even to mention that some of the faction's quests feel like busy work, like this bit where you choose between two tailors by elaborately sabotaging the other for clothes you don't want by characters you don't care about. Remember how I said that despite the game's lack of central exposition around its main plot, there were still a bunch of really enjoyable parts in this meet the factions bit that it kept me distracted long enough from the main questline to not care? The Roundels were not one of these instances. I don't hate their questline, I just wish I had a reason to be doing it, either for the faction in itself, like Brickton or Camden, for the quest in itself, like Miller's Men, or for some secret third thing, like, oh, I don't know, relevance to the main story I still know nothing about. Oh well, while we're here, we might as well do some side quests. Side quests are obviously a pretty integral part of any Fallout game for a whole host of reasons that I do not need to explain. The most televised and talked about one is the one where the player can meet a young Alistair Tenpenny and blow up the London Eye for him. What makes this side quest so great is a matter of two things. Well, three if you count the spectacle. But the first major reason is that it blows Fallout 3's version of the quest out of the water, haha, by being a parody of itself. The Fallout 3 quest to me is a pretty big failure of storytelling because it's absurd in a way that cheapens the rest of the game's storytelling. It gives you a clear binary moral choice involving a nonsensical nuclear bomb and a straightforwardly evil rich guy who loves to watch people suffer. It's emblematic of a lot of Fallout 3's issues, which is why people like me bring it up so much. In Fallout London, the quest is identical. Tenpenny enlists your help to blow up the London Eye, something that has become its own settlement with its own people because it's an eyesore from the view of his penthouse. Without a player's knowledge of Fallout 3, this quest would be just as bad as the mirrored quest was in that game, but the fact that this character could feasibly have done this exact thing, blowing up poor people's towns because they're ugly, twice on two different continents, makes it absolutely hilarious to me and fully forgivable. I mean, forgivable as far as the writing goes, he probably doesn't need to be, doing all that.
Boom.
Yes, yes, it is gone. Finally.
The fact that the entire ordeal is couched in absurdity makes the absurdity feel more like the Silver Shroud quest in 4, like a quest whose absurdity is excused by the fact that it never took itself seriously to begin with, unlike the Tenpenny quest in 3, which takes itself way too seriously. The second big thing, and my favorite thing of all, is that if you say no to Tenpenny here and report evidence of his plot to the authorities, you'll later get a message informing you that the charges couldn't go through because Tenpenny fled the country. Taking the good option here sends Tenpenny to Fallout 3 and potentially destroys all of Megaton in a butterfly effect-y kind of way, which somehow makes the entire thing even more absurd, which at this point I hadn't thought would be possible. My second favorite side quest is the one you can do for a local bar to find a potentially one-of-one, ultra-rare whiskey his boss needs him to get so he can serve it to his rich gentry clientele. This quest sends you on a goose chase through a bunch of really dangerous areas, all to find the booze, bring it back, and then immediately biff it all over the floor.
What the fuck?
And, well...
Wait, that might just work. Can you smell that? Rather earthy, I must say. A little sulphury, even. Really seeps into the nostrils.
Oh, yes. Delightful.
Now for the taste. Just a drop on the tongue. Yes. Definitely getting a hint of wood there. Now, let's give this a proper swirl around the mouth.
Oh, Roderick.
Very full on the tongue, it must be said.
This is awesome. This is exactly what a Fallout side quest should be. It's absurd, but not in the Tenpenny fourth wall kind of way, but in the 2000s comedy movie kind of way. The quest deals with real people in this world and gives you context for the class struggle the main plot hints at throughout. And it also just happens to involve piss drinking. You know, you can never really go wrong. These quests are both amazing, and so are many of the other ones, like the Lovecrafty Far Harbor-esque Thames Haven chain, or the one with the gentry where you can join social groups and support local causes to raise your status.
Don't say anything. Not a word. I'm about to make a pitch that will change your life. The well-being of the environment is one of the most important issues of our generation, right? The environment is like all around us. It totally affects everything, including us. So let's get down to business. What is the biggest problem the environment faces? Don't answer that, I'll tell ya. The answer is stuff. Yes, more stuff equals more pollution. And what stuff do we, here in Westminster, use the most? That's right, paper and typewriter ink. So all in all, in conclusion, we must reduce the maximum sentence for indentured labour from 100 years to 99 years. 99 is 2 characters. 100 is 3. We'd be saving 1 character every time a person is given a maximum sentence for indentured labour. Think of all the ink and paper we'd save.
After showing the guards your signed petition, they beckon you to a secret entrance hidden in a phone booth at Westminster, at which point you watch what is essentially a cutscene set in the halls of the Mountain King. But unfortunately, or fortunately I guess, you end up in the bowels of Scotland Yard. I would have liked if this prison sequence was longer. All in all, it feels a little too easy to break out of. And once again, I'm struck by the fact that we're in a facility run by Smythe, staffed by clones made by Smythe, and we still go through the entire dungeon learning very little about Smythe that we don't already know. I understand that a concern around making the prison sequence longer or more involved might be that forcing players into a more linear sequence or zone for an extended period of time wouldn't play well. There is a certain type of gamer that reacts to closed-off portions of open-world games like a child having its favorite toy taken away from them. The mere prospect of not being able to go wander off and ignore the plot occurring in front of them is so heinous that they'd rather die. You know, give me back my toy. And I understand that criticism, but to that I say, if being free is so important to the game, why put the player in a prison? Further, what really is the point of a prison that you can break out of in 2 minutes? It feels like gameplay and story clashed and there was no real solution, leading to a short dungeon with no real contribution to the story other than Smythe bad, Smythe has clones, Smythe controls Westminster from the shadows. And these are all things we learned in Hour 2, now being repeated to us in Hour 10. Despite it being a central part of Van Buren, there really is still no prison sequence in a Fallout game, and I was really excited for London to change that. I still don't think there's a prison sequence in a Fallout game. Part of this is definitely a crisis of expectation. I was really excited to land in the cell. I was half expecting something similar to that quest in Skyrim with the Forsworn, which is up there for my favorite quest in that game. You can tell because I remember it, unlike any other quest in Skyrim. But I think regardless of whether or not the dice were loaded and I had crazy expectations, this quest fails to deliver anything plot relevant or anything interesting gameplay-wise, and it almost works against the plot by making Smythe and his people look straight up incompetent. At the risk of doing play-by-play video essayism even more than I already am, this time I'll skip ahead to a choice that doesn't matter and faction introductions that aren't compelling. Word on the street is that Smythe is attending a big social tournament in Westminster with lots of little events like archery, jousting, etc. It's a cool little scene. Here's where you're finally introduced to the two major non-Smythe factions of the game, but we're not here for them. We're here to get federal. We're given a choice of whether to plant a bomb to kill Smythe and potentially lots of other people, or to not do that. Sounds fine, but unfortunately regardless of the choice you make, the bomb goes off regardless, and Smythe goes unharmed. There are no consequences for you. People assume you planted the bomb regardless of if you did or not, and you'll forget any of this happened in about an hour. Cool cutscene though. The second playthrough I did it, this happened. Just thought I'd share, I really have nothing to say. More importantly is those factions I mentioned. I already brought up how I was disappointed that they weren't introduced earlier, so I'll skip over that criticism to one more pressing for this point in the game: how they're introduced and how you join them. Joining Smythe bypasses this issue. You've been introduced to Smythe in his program before. I did complain that you know very little about Smythe by this point, but the unfortunate truth is that you know several times more about Smythe than you might have learned about the other two. The way you're prompted to join these factions is through conversations with NPCs who represent them in their ideas, handing out pamphlets or participating in the games. You essentially just get a momentary synopsis of what they believe as they elevator pitch themselves to you, which is fine and in one instance kind of clever, but crucially their actions tell you nothing. Think about other faction introductions in these games. The first time you meet a member of the Brotherhood of Steel in Fallout 1, they send you on a death mission because they'd rather have you die than be more than a temporary inconvenience. They don't want you here. Now consider how the presentation of the Brotherhood changes in Fallout 4. Now, rather than hiding out and hoping nobody bothers them, they come in shock and hostile. Not only do they want you to know who they are, they want you to know that they aren't messing around. The point I'm getting at here is that a good faction introduction is more than just exposition. Ideally, you want to learn about these factions from what they do on top of what they say. The problem in London is that Camelot and the Fifth Column here don't really do anything at all. They're just exposition. Meeting the Knights of Camelot, you get an aesthetic and the promise of democracy. This faction wants to take down the gentry and institute democratic systems and processes for all of London, rather than leaving the power just to the aristocracy. They seem nice. That's the vibe you get. Nice. To the game's credit, this is an accurate assessment, as Camelot makes up what is essentially the good ending to the game. The clever bit I mentioned earlier is in the what I can only assume is intentional mischaracterization of the Fifth Column by this propaganda robot. The terms used in this introduction are a lot more vaguely populist. Taking down the gentry for London and for the people is a broadly popular idea that a lot of people from all different walks of life can get behind, and before you know it, they're burning copies of Capital for being wrongthink. Even though I did think this was clever, it's still just exposition. I heard very, very little about either of these factions up to this point. I never got a Nipton massacre encounter or a Frank Horgan execution scene to show me these factions existing in the world before I got a chance to join them. The way the major factions in this game are set up is a lot less believable than the minor factions who do have a sense of place and purpose in the world. You'll fight Miller's men long before you get to meet Miller and do a quest for him. But the first time I even hear of Camelot, outside of a brief mention at the start, is here, being prompted to join a faction I just found out exists. And for what? Democracy? The concept? To get a sword, maybe? Okay, well, maybe if there's a sword involved. The last issue with this faction introduction is that the point of no return is not clearly communicated. You learn very little about these factions at this event, and doing one quest for any of them hard gates you from ever interfacing with any of the others. What this means is that you aren't actually allowed to make an informed decision on which faction you want to join, because you never get a chance to talk to or learn much of anything about any faction but the one that you arbitrarily decide you want to work with based off this light and even sometimes deceptive elevator pitch. Before we get a little deeper into the factions and their quest lines, I want to define some standards. There are a lot of ways you can measure what makes a faction good, but to me it boils down to a few really key important things. First, compelling characters. Even just one. Note that compelling here doesn't mean likable or even realistic. I think if characters in a faction are likable and realistic, that's great, but the important bit here is that there ought to be at least one character that I want to see more of. Second, factions need a reason for their presence. Where did they come from? Why are they here? Are they realistically local? If they aren't, is that a part of how they interact with the world around them? A good faction shouldn't feel like it was airdropped here without reasonable context. A good faction has a sense of place you can feel both inwardly in how their membership, ideology, and aesthetics fit the existing world around them, and outwardly in how their ways and efforts in the world meaningfully affect that world. Speaking of ideology, a faction needs one of those too. This gets tricky because that word means a lot to a lot of different people. When I say ideology, some people interpret that as me saying a faction needs to make a statement about real-world politics, or that a faction needs a manifesto, or pronouns. What I mean by ideology is that while the sense of place discussed a second ago gives the player insight into a group's past and present, an ideology gives the player insight into a group's present to future. What do these people want? What do they believe? What makes them part of this group rather than any of the other ones? That's a really important point to reiterate actually, because unless it's specifically part of their quests to create a factional coalition and agreement between groups, if two factions aren't ideologically separate enough, a lot of players will realize the difference is arbitrary. If factions don't have coherent ideologies and perspectives about the world, it's not merely difficult to relate to or understand those factions, it's difficult to even take them seriously. What makes one faction different than another if neither has a different ideology from the other one? At that point, it's just two nameless raider gangs punching each other to death. At best, their differences are circumstantial, and at worst, they're nothing but aesthetic. That is, if a faction has a clear aesthetic to begin with, and that's my final bit of criteria for good factions, and probably the easiest to get right. Aesthetic is easy, not because making a unique visual style for each group is light work, but because this is the fun part. The aesthetic is what gets brought up in brainstorming meetings. What if we had a faction that was blank? Radiation cult, Elvis impersonators, mutant army, fascist US military, fascist US military, fascist US, not military, fascist US military, parentheses old. Sorry, that's going to get people mad at me again. Let's keep going. Aesthetic is important for the most obvious reasons out of any of these. The aesthetic sells you on a faction early, and visual design keeps you interested really far into a story. The Brotherhood of Steel would, in my opinion, never have been the cultural force it is in the community and in the games and their marketing, if not for the visual design of power armor. You can be as fascist-y and US military-y as you want, but if there's a big suit of metal at the end, I'm in. No, actually, you should probably cut that. Part of the reason you wouldn't have seen much of Camelot up to this point can be excused in-universe by geography. This faction's territory and influence is felt most in the countryside down in the southwestern side of the world map. This is kind of smart environmental design if you think about it. Of course, the faction full of knights would be found in the part of the map with more rural open fields and forests, as opposed to the denser cityscape making up the rest of the map. Camelot nails the aesthetic criteria of how I judge factions, which is really lucky for it because as much as the visuals make me want to like this faction, it struggles deeply in all its other aspects. As mentioned earlier, you wouldn't really have known much about Camelot until about right now. Their existence is informed by their nation's history in a cute way, but the introduction to Camelot is the most random of the three factions. You don't get super convincing answers as to where they came from, and most damningly for me, you don't get any super convincing answers as to where they're going. It very well could be that I'm just a politics nerd, but when Arthur, the leader of Camelot, promises to bring democracy to London, that just isn't enough for me. What do you mean by democracy? When you first arrive at Camelot's main base, Arthur allows two rival members of the faction to have a duel to the death, despite his protest. Even though he is the leader of Camelot and technically has the power to stop this, everyone else involved outvotes him, and so it proceeds. What this indicates to me is that Camelot believes in a form of direct democracy, and so my question then is how in the world do you plan to organize that? Will there be endless meetings held in some central location for Londoners to come debate and vote on every single individual issue? In such a system, what is the point of Arthur having more power than anyone else? He makes a big show of telling you how dedicated he is to not abusing his power, but where did this power come from? If he intends to not use it, even in cases of saving lives, why does he have it? Maybe it's a sort of of constitutional direct democracy thing, wherein the people make all the decisions democratically, but those decisions have to abide by certain rules as enforced by Arthur. But Camelot has an inner circle, the Round Table. This would contradict the direct democracy idea and point to a representative model. But at multiple points in the Camelot questline, you're charged with doing lots of different things for Camelot by Arthur. Was this decision to send you specifically to do these things voted on, or just chosen arbitrarily by Arthur? If it's the latter, why does Arthur have the authority to send strangers on crucial faction business but not to step in and save one of his people's lives? If you side with them and go through with their ending, they hold elections, but elections for who? A parliament? A monarch? What in the world does Camelot believe, man? I'm actually like kind of losing my mind here over this. Big swords and being nice, usually. That's all it boils down to. That is, nice until you bump into one of the dozens of NPCs they crammed into the tight hallways of their base.
Oi, watch it!
The named NPCs of Camelot are passable for the most part. Arthur's defining personality trait is a sincere and full-chested dedication to the cause, but as we've gone over, their cause is poorly defined and vague, so it's hard to appreciate him for his convictions. The most interesting characters are Camelot's auxiliary cast. For example, the pre-war ghoul Merlin has a lot of really interesting insight, and I often feel like the faction would have been better off had he played a bigger role. No character has a more concrete reason to build the democracy in London than an old patriot yearning for the past and trying to keep alive the fire of Western democratic processes. He's by far the coolest character in the entire faction, and even though he plays a significant role in the plot, I do find myself wishing I was talking to him anytime I had to interface with Arthur's accented musings about a democracy he fails to define. For me at least, Camelot's good characters don't make up for the black hole that is their ideology. The ideals of democracy don't actually mean anything concretely for this faction or for this world, but democracy is a word with good connotations, so the player knows that what Camelot fights for is good things. They like good things, they hate bad things. I'm all in. Put it on a campaign poster, Camelot sweep.
Mrs. Griffin, what do you plan to do about crime in our city?
A lot. 9/11.
One of the most puzzling parts about Fallout London's content is the strange place the Vagabonds occupy. If you'll remember, you can start the Vagabonds questline right away from level 1, before you even cure your debuffs or find out about the clones. The Vagabonds questline is just as, if not longer than the other faction storylines, with its own characters, power struggles, choices, and cool moments, but it is fully parallel to the main story. The Vagabonds do not have their own main plot ending, nor do they interact at any point with any of the main plot's factions. You can't lead the Vagabonds to battle in the name of the Fifth. You can't leverage your connections to bolster the information gathering of Camelot. This questline almost exists out of time and space, an entirely separate storyline, almost like a much longer version of an Elder Scrolls Guild questline. I wanted to include it here primarily because I had absolutely no idea where else to put it, but also because I think Camelot's regional presence and otherwise absence in the world is really interesting to compare to the Vagabonds. Both factions exist pretty much solely on one corner of the map. If you're elsewhere, you'd be unlikely to see, hear, or interact with them. This creates a really interesting situation because a main plot faction, one of the 3 key groups that unlock your ending, is just as relevant to the wider world of the game as what is essentially a really, really long side quest. That ought to sting a little bit to think about, but what makes it worse is that the Vagabonds questline is just straightforwardly better than the Camelot questline.
Ah, lovely jubbly. Give it here, and I can get it cleared up. Here we are, a fully restored...
Number 7. Student watches porn and gets naked. Number 6. Man urinates on fellow passenger for not being allowed to smoke.
It's dramatic, its characters are compelling, and you have a lot of cool story choices which reflect in how the mini-story wraps up. At one point you get specific instructions from a bunch of different characters about different tasks they need you to do so the Vagabonds can consolidate power and break up some of the operations of their rival, the Isle of Dogs. For example, you're tasked with freeing prisoners on an Isle of Dogs boat, and you have the choice of whether or not you sink the ship to send a message. This choice affects how different characters, Gaunt and Johnny, see you and whether they'll back you in becoming the new leader of the Vagabonds when the time comes. Crucially, the Vagabonds questline gives you a reason to care. These people, imperfect as they may be, especially Gaunt, who is characterized as an astounding asshole, saved you from the Angel Lab. They broke in and allowed you the room to get out. Gaunt gave you your knife. You have a reason to want to find a solution to the gang war between the Vagabonds and the Isle of Dogs because you were roped into it from the start. There's even a way to broker a peace deal between the two factions if you have the skill set for it. It's a real shame that the game fakes you out so hard at the start with treating the Vagabonds questline like a viable alternative to the main story, because it almost feels like it could be. It has everything a main faction should, save for a way to transition the events between the Vagabonds and the IODs into your hunt for Smythe. Like so many things in this mod, I like nearly everything that's here, but sometimes I can't help but wish it was just a little different. A little more polished, a little more tied into the rest of the story. I also wish that I hadn't lost all of my footage recording the main questline for the Vagabonds questline twice. No, seriously, I'm not fucking joking. I lost it twice. I give up. But the good news is that after the major disappointment of Camelot and the pleasant surprise of the Vagabonds, we can talk about a faction I enjoyed more thoroughly than both of them put together. I really love the fifth column, like way more than I ever expected to. And that's because I think it does something a lot of games still really struggle with, making evil factions insane and kind of funny. Games forever have had this really big issue with their evil routes. Being evil is a bummer. It makes you feel bad to do bad things because you're a real human being, and even through the fiction, there's a part of you that, at least on a first playthrough, will always choose anything other than the clear, obvious evil faction. Fallout has had this problem in the past too. The Institute is like this in Fallout 4, the Legion is like this in New Vegas, and the Enclave is like this in 3. But the Enclave isn't like this in 2. You can't join the Enclave in Fallout 2, but you bet that if you could, it would have been a way more compelling route than any of the other ones I listed for one simple reason.
Welcome to Camp Navarro. So you're the new replacement. You are out of uniform, soldier! Where is your power armor?
Making your evil faction just a little bit silly is truly a lost art. I really believe this is the secret sauce to making an evil faction fun and interesting. Little breaks of comedy or absurdity make the entire route feel a little bit lighter and more engaging. The fifth column in London is great because they're evil. Their leader is an egomaniac who's constantly tweaking, and the literal insanity of their leader creates a lot of figurative insanity in the plot and among the faction's auxiliary characters. The fifth column questline is also helped by beginning with an absolutely preposterous series of banger quests, the likes of which the main story never saw or sees again. The first mission after recruitment is very unassuming at first. You are tasked with going to a local settlement and spreading the good news, doing good deeds around town so that the people are more likely to enlist and come join the fifth. If you're not thinking, this just feels like any other quest, but if you're analyzing what's going on, you realize quickly that you're doing propaganda. You are artificially engineering goodwill towards your faction, and if you're cleverer than that, you're asking, wait, why does this faction need to do this? Shouldn't its actions as a group for the people of London fighting the evil elites be enough? And then the twist.
You're overthrowing the tyrannical gentry, doing away with their stuffy, outdated traditions. You're out here making a difference. I want to make a difference. A real difference.
Fine day for it, ain't it? You must be Giovanni.
And you must be the murderous scum that killed my brother. I bet you gave the orders, didn't you?
Say what?
Your rule will never come to be. What?
Turns out the fifth column has ops. Immediately you get a feeling for the kind of presence the fifth column has in this world. You learn what they're here for and what the rest of the world thinks about them, and you have a hand in changing that. Far more than Camelot, the fifth column represents a real force in London that people know about, a force that is here whether people like it or not. The second quest is given to you by a second in command to Eve Varney, their leader. He wants you to receive some books on political theory and philosophy so he can teach Eve's daughter, who has largely been confined strictly to the thoughts of her mother, more about the world than she would otherwise know. Great premise, great setup, and this quest for the books might be my favorite quest in the game. You find yourself in the British Museum, staffed by an AI curator named Terry, who is half GLaDOS and half the narrator from the Stanley Parable.
I think you deserve a round of applause. Can you stand still for a moment while I find the applause come on? It won't take me more than just a second. All you have to do is stand right there. Oh, drat. I actually pressed the applause button instead of the trap button. Silly me. Such a silly mistake. This Just enough to make you want to stand completely still as I activate my trap. Okay, I believe I have what you humans call a programming problem. Let's just pretend you didn't hear all of that. And, oh, it was actually a trap all along. Damn it. Fine. You can move on.
He's great. Shutting him down and grabbing the books. Is that Mao? Oh yeah, we're cooking. You return, get thanked, and then Eve flips her shit. I'm gonna play the whole rant here.
Important for Lily to learn about the world she's growing up in. Political theory isn't just about the past. It helps her understand the present and prepare for the future.
Political theory? More like brainwashing. You're just trying to indoctrinate her with your own beliefs.
No, Eve. You're the one brainwashing her.
Oh, how fucking dare you? How dare you?
I assure you, Eve, I'm not trying to indoctrinate her. I'm simply introducing her to different perspectives so she can make an informed decision when she's older.
See what you're doing to her, John. You're upsetting her with your nonsense.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Lily. We're just having a discussion. But it's important for you to learn about different ideas and opinions.
Different ideas? All you're teaching her is confusion and doubt. She doesn't need to be burdened with all this.
But Eve, shielding her from the complexities of the world won't do her any favours. She needs to be prepared to navigate through it. If anything, you are the one burdening her with your proto-fascism.
You take that back right now, John. I will not tolerate such disrespect, even from you. Oh, Lily, sweetheart, Mummy's just trying to protect you from harmful ideas.
Jesus Christ! The fifth column has the most clear ideology of any of the groups in the game, which is ironic given that their ideology follows an even shakier label than Camelot's. As hard as it is to define democracy, that struggle is one of specialization. Democracy means so much and so many things, and so a faction advocating for it has significant questions it has to answer if that endorsement is to be taken seriously. Fascism is a word that honestly means very little. Fascism isn't about any coherent political plan or program. Fascism is about us. Who us is arbitrary. You can tell this even within the fifth column. To the members, us is London. To Eve, us is Eve. The only thing important about us is that we aren't them. Who them is, funnily enough, also happens to be arbitrary. Usually they're objects of disgust, genetically or spiritually inferior to us, but also more powerful than us and very threatening. Fascism is contradiction. The ideology of fascism, at best, is power, and whatever is deemed to give us more of it is what fascists believe in. And indeed, nearly all of the fifth column's quests involve consolidating power. You orchestrate a military coup in the Tommies, you take control of a central radio broadcast station so you can spread your message, and in a side quest you paste up more of the propaganda posters you might have been seeing up to this point. The column has a few standout characters. A whole bunch of them, actually. I love Horatio, one of the Eve's department directors, who sometimes feels like he's constantly trying to one-up Eve's psychopathy. An early mission you do for him involves going under Eve's nose to kidnap a Thamesfolk citizen for medical experiments. So you kidnap a Thamesfolk child to ransom the Thamesfolk doctor with, who happens to be the doctor who cured you of half of your debuff in Act 1. You torture this man and his family, and you force him into indentured servitude after he helped you for free. It's evil, and Horatio loves it. He's a perfect squirmy little rat of a character who eventually gets his comeuppance once he attempts and fails a one-man coup, and you get to decide what punishment he deserves. But of course, the characters that really tie the fifth together are Eve and Lily Varney. Their relationship is absolutely brutal to observe. Eve is an egomaniac, so all of her efforts regarding her child focus on creating the perfect fifth column leader, which to her obviously means a newer, younger version of herself. And Lily is fully on board with this. She knows nothing else, so naturally she really wants to impress her mother, to contribute to the fifth column and be recognized, be loved by her mom. But because Eve is such a nutcase, even though she wants Lily to be the new head of the column when she's older, Eve can't get over herself, the cult of grandeur she's built in her name. So Lily doesn't get recognized. She doesn't get loved. She is at once the most important thing in the world to the column and completely unimportant. Just one brick in the palace of self-absorption her mother has built.
Pay attention to the speech, Lily. One day you'll be making your own.
I will?
Of course. One day you will be Eve.
And sound out a mighty yell. Yell with me. And let our voices echo through London and rattle the rotten foundation upon which this city was built. As we learn and battle our way through weeks to come, let a roar crawl out of your throat. Let the years of pain resurface. Let those tears be shed. Let the gentry know that we are hungry, and the time has come for us to feast. My God!
We said shut up!
As your leader, I promise. We will feast the rotting corpse of London, and then this city will be ours forevermore! Death to the gentry! Death to Camelot! Power to the fifth column forevermore! Thank you, one and all!
Fascism is contradiction. Eve is a psychopath. She's the most unlikable character in the mod. I rarely have hated a Fallout villain more on a personal level, but she is incredibly compelling for that fact. You want to stick around for the questline because you want to watch the car crash. You want to see just how far this can go. It's sad, it's funny, it's shocking, and it acts as a key reason why I found the fifth column storyline way more engaging than the Camelot one. Before getting into the two endings, I want to give Camelot some credit. At the end of each of these storylines, you take it to the leader of the other, storming the column with Camelot or storming Camelot with the column. If you sided with the fifth column, you get a frankly really difficult boss fight versus Arthur in his medieval power armor, a one-on-one showdown, a clash of beliefs. This is the best boss fight in the game to my mind, but if you do it the other way, things end in a substantially darker way. You break into the fifth column base, mow through Eve's devoted soldiers, and when you reach Eve's room, you find Lily, cowering in a corner, her mother a corpse with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Camelot almost gets the best of both worlds in these endings. They put up a valiant and badass fight if you play for the fifth column, but they also have a much more gut-wrenching conclusion to their battle with the fifth if you play on their side. So it's not all bad for Camelot, and the fifth shines narratively even when you aren't playing on their side. The ending of the game goes nearly identically based on whether you start with the fifth or with Camelot. It's this massive, sprawling combat arena where you maul through dozens of clones while the game's music takes center stage. Even though there is essentially no enemy variety, this combat is made engaging by its flair. Westminster is a beautiful place, and sieging it feels important, feels momentous. You take a few strategic objectives for your chosen faction before fighting through the Palace of Westminster itself, and finally, after perhaps 40 hours at this point, you finally get some answers as to who Smythe is and what he wants.
I repeat, for the avoidance of doubt, and those inattentive to my rulings, please go to the dispatch box. Parliament is now in session. Order! Order!
Mr. Speaker, I...
Order!
Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight to address a matter of great urgency to our nation's security. The judgment of the Right Honourable Smythe across from me at the dispatch box.
Good day, Smythe.
You saw this reveal a mile away. Smythe is you, Or rather, you are Smythe, a clone perfect enough that you were meant to be his successor, but the Vagabond raid broke you out before you grew the most crucial part, Smythe's mind, his memories. Smythe has been keeping himself alive this way since the war. When one Smythe dies, a copy with all his memories and thoughts is grown to replace him. This is an interesting premise, and the concept that he would make a parliament of copies of himself is about as Fallout as it gets. It's absurd in a way few other series properly achieve, but I unfortunately have to remind you that this is all in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the game. The parliament sequence is funny and a cool set piece, but it doesn't feel conclusive. It doesn't have the drama to it that something like this ought to have. This can partially be attributed to a failure to take itself seriously, but I think it points more decidedly at what I've already been saying. This is too little too late. This story is almost begging for a reveal in the middle, where the player has to reckon with the fact of who they are and choose in the following factional struggle how they want to react to their sense of self being shaken up by that. This could have been after Act 1, or it could have been that missing prison section I brought up earlier. But missing is definitely, to me, the right word for this. This feels like something they reached for but missed. This final parliamentary scene could have been a serious judgment of how the experiment actually turned out. They play at this, put on a show about you being a traitor to the cause, but it's hollow. There's no serious reckoning for if you've actually been doing things the Smythe way. There could be a nice little bit of reactivity here by commenting on your build and choices. If you chose to side with Camelot, or especially if you chose to side with the fifth column, how did you pilot those operations? I say especially for the fifth column because there's a really interesting point to be made about how these two factions, when you look at their leaders and what they believe, don't actually disagree on very much. The column is willing to kill, torture, kidnap, and burn to establish control for their supreme leader who knows best. As we'll see in the Angel plot, Smythe is the same, he just had a head start. Angel is in a lot of ways just a more sophisticated and advanced version of the fifth column's ideal totalitarian ruling body. So if you rose to the upper echelons of the fifth column, there is an obvious point to be made that you and Smythe essentially arrived at the same conclusion. Maybe in this final act, exposed to the idea that your totalitarian genes merely opted for the column as a rebound from your destiny as a Smythe, you could switch sides. With Camelot, I don't think there'd be any room for anything other than destroying Angel, but there's an interesting commentary to be made about democracy here. A Camelot player might have a little more to say than, wow, that's weird, when exposed to Smythe creating a democracy of one within this parliament. One of the biggest problems of Fallout London's final third is that the factional struggle for London and the cat and mouse game between you and Smythe are fully divorced from each other. Regardless of whether you go with the column or with Camelot, you never reveal to either factions your motivations for working with them. Eve and Arthur never learn that you're a clone, or essentially anything you know about Smythe and the Angel program. In fact, what Angel really is, or why there are so many clones, is a complete mystery from beginning to end for the leaders of these factions, because you don't go into Parliament with them, nor do you do any work involving Angel as a part of their quests, nor do you really expose much about Angel at all in your conversations. Part of this does feel unfinished in the way many of these big mods are. Like, there are a lot of good ideas, but when it came to executing, the team had to make that all-consuming choice about whether or not they were willing to let perfect become the enemy of done, and they erred on the side of the latter. I can't blame them for this, but I want to be clear how cool this ending sequence could have been, how reactive it could have been to your choices, your character, and the story you've built. But for now, there's a punchline. The robot says order, and you get to meet the Smythe in control at the top of Big Ben. If you sided with the fifth or with Camelot, there is no way to talk him down, and the encounter ends with a dramatic, if simple, one-on-one melee umbrella fight, after which you can choose to spare or kill Smythe. Like with the Parliament sequence, I don't dislike this, but there was no reward for my specific character unless I arbitrarily put insane stock into melee. You can't talk Smythe down, you can't use your gun skill, lay a trap, hack a computer, or do anything other than get funneled into this fun, dramatic, stylish, but hollow final moment, concluding a fun, dramatic, stylish, but hollow final few hours. Even though the ending itself is subpar, I think they did a really excellent job of putting together really detailed ending slides. Not only does it go into what your faction does, or what happens to Smythe if you save him, there are loads of slides for the minor factions and the game's many companions. Before we tackle the Angel story, it's worth spending a little time talking about them. Placing the companions this far into the video may seem a bit like an odd move, but what I found with the mod's companions is that whatever critique I had of them, I largely just attributed as a critique of the wider story, and not really them in themselves. The criticisms I have make no sense without context, and even with the story context I've given, my issues still need a bit of qualification. But before we get to that, I want to get out of the way that I really enjoyed my time with all of the mod's companions. They were all unique and interesting characters of their own, but, and here's where comparison becomes the thief of joy, we were really truly spoiled by New Vegas's companion writing and Fallout 4's companion dialogues. I have two direct issues with these companions that have nothing to do with how good New Vegas's companions were, I promise. The first one's that in over 200 hours of playtime, I reached enough affinity to unlock only 2 companion quests by natural means. Kira the treasure hunter and Archie the boy screecher are the only companions whose quests I received without intervention in the console. I don't know if that's a skill gap or an intentional design decision, but compared to Fallout 4 where companions basically started falling over on you the moment you gave them the time of day, London's host of friends and bodyguards felt decidedly more closed off. Not just with you though, as my other criticism is a lack of companion intervention in dialogues with third parties. This is what made Fallout 4's companions for me. The little interjections characters like Nick and Piper would have in conversations where they would have something worth adding. This move by Bethesda was a really compelling one, as it painted the game's companions as characters in the world who don't stop existing and having their own thoughts the moment they start following you. London's suite has a far more speak when spoken to angle in dialogues when people other than you are involved, which feels like a step back from Fallout 4's most impressive addition to its companion system. The most disappointing part of Fallout London's companions is that they get so close to a thematic consistency angle. They get so close to having companion narratives mirroring or adjacent to your own, but the ball's dropped because you don't really get your own narrative. Kira the treasure hunter is the perfect example. She is a character who is ridiculous when you meet her. She seems to have lost touch with reality and believes she is some important and renowned finder of valuables and artifacts. She goes full Silver Shroud with it and refers to you as her companion and sidekick, even though she's following you and the things you're doing out in the world have nothing to do with her. This is a really great, really fresh, and really Fallout idea for a companion. But what makes Kira really strong narratively is watching the facade break down a little over time, learning about the traumas she's had as a servant for a rich family and then a slave, gang member, and drug addict. Her persona is a way of decoupling what she has been from what she wants to be by overcompensating in the latter direction. For a character like the protagonist of this game, this should be seriously relatable. I mean, you are literally a clone of the story's antagonist, and so trying to find a way to reckon with your past and embrace who you truly want to be is something the player should find a lot of kinship with Kira over. To remind you, the player doesn't learn this fact about themselves until the final 5 minutes, well after any conversation about this could have been had with Kira. There exists a similar struggle with a lot of the game's companions. Archie doesn't know where he belongs, is isolated, and doesn't really have anywhere to call home. Mountbatten has lived a long life and has to reckon with his past and choose to live a new life, experience new things. John with the 5th column has conflicts with Eve, but still wants to be the best for Lily, who's implied to be his daughter. All of these characters have an inner conflict between their past and their future, between who they are and who they want to be, just like the player, except the player doesn't know it. As is, the companion stories are good. They're interesting and the quests are mostly fun, but they're missing just a little bit from greatness, something I've said about a lot of Fallout London's plot up to this point. The final chance I had for this problem to be solved was to do a final run of the game, with the faction that ought to give the player the most answers of all. The Angel plotline was something I was looking forward to the moment I had finished the game once over. I couldn't wait to see if picking to side with Smythe would open up the inner workings of the story earlier in the way I described. Maybe the player will learn early on that they're a clone, and that reveal will have its time in the sun. This moment was a teachable one for me, and one that's instructed a lot of my criticism of the story on the several rewrites and re-edits of the script. Because the Angel plotline didn't do this. It didn't do what I expected, or what I wanted, what I thought I needed, but it was still highly unique and engaging in a myriad of delightful and unexpected ways. Dashing of my expectations number 1. You don't meet Smythe until the exact same time you otherwise would. How does the plot function then? Through routine, mysterious, and brief conversations over the phone. You don't get the whole picture like I expected, but you do get a better one. What does Smythe want? Orwellian control. The cattle to be placated. How is he going about this? Through you, his James Bond-style agent going across the city sowing seeds.
Angel believes in whatever I want it to. I am Angel. And what I believe is on a need-to-know basis. I have bold plans for this city, and I want someone equally bold to enact them. I could get into specifics, but I won't.
The Angel plot is kind of lonely, in that unlike the other factions, you don't have a companion or a suite of characters, and you only ever get to talk to Smythe when he feels it's advantageous for you to speak with him, and even so, you do it on his terms. When you do get to work with others, you come to realize that anyone other than Smythe is a disposable asset, at best a creature to be experimented on or observed. The first quest is a test on an experimental treatment to cure feral ghouls, which fails. The second is to find and destroy any information on another test, this one successful, which happened to turn someone into a giant crab. The Angel questline is pretty ominous, not in the strictly evil way of the fifth column questline, but in a new, less human way.
Ahoy hoy, Wayfarer. I trust everything is under control, and this is merely a courtesy call. I see. So one of the good professor's pets survived. Euthanize it.
The fifth column's evil is the evil of Eve. Hot-blooded, passionate, often poorly thought out. In Angel, you are always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. You destroy evidence, start a coup within the fifth column from the inside, and assassinate Guinevere at the party she was supposed to be a spy for Camelot in. This is where it gets properly dark, and you begin to understand the extent of Smythe's plotting. After killing Guinevere, Angel clones her as an obedient asset, and you and this fake Guinevere walk right into Camelot and watch as she kills Arthur himself, feeling a brief moment of regret in doing so before you finish the job. Assassination, bribery, election rigging, 2 coups, not just the fifth but the Tommies as well, propaganda, and an honest-to-God false flag attack.
Whispers of our organization have inevitably begun to spread, but it's too late. We already control everything, and they don't even know it. Now is the time, my dear friend, to catapult Angel onto the national stage. Go to Land's End Inn in Peckham. Your luggage will await you in room 5. Be seeing you.
I hope I've made it clear that the events of the Angel plot are interesting in and of themselves, more than enough to make up for its lack of interesting permanent side characters, or answers regarding who Smythe is and what he wants. But my favorite part of the Angel plotline involves none of this. It's a little thing, but it demonstrates an amount of care for the writing not overwhelmingly present in the rest of the game's dialogue. The further you go along in the Angel questline, the more you'll notice your own dialogue options changing. You start to gain the ability to talk more eloquently, to persuade and coerce, to make subtle threats instead of overt ones. You start to sound a lot like Smythe. This stuff is a perfect example of what I think a plot like Fallout London's could have been. A role-playing game where you're faced with the existential dread of a role already having been predetermined for you, and choosing either to fight against that or lean into it. What I underestimated was the game's ability to portray at least some parts of this without the player ever knowing why. I can't imagine what effect doing an Angel run as your first playthrough would have on a player's assessment of the story, but I know I would have caught on to the player acting like Smythe. I think the experience of this happening is enhanced by knowing why, but there's a level of ominousness that not knowing provides that I can't deny. Becoming like Smythe over time and then getting a grand, silent welcome to the building of Parliament was a highlight of the entire mod for me. Instead of being proclaimed a traitor to the Smythe regime, you're heralded as the most Smythe of all. The meeting with Smythe at the end is still a little less reactive than I would have liked. You make the choice whether to accept payment and live your own peaceful life as Smythe continues his reign, or to do the duel the same way you would have with the other factions and take Smythe's position. As cool as that proposition is, the choice is shallow. It has nothing to do with what you've done up to this point or the character you've built, and there hasn't been enough time to reckon with the reality of who Smythe is, who you are, for the choice to feel meaningful or informed. I think I've already ranted enough about the endings to the game though. Let's wrap it up. Put the Patreon plug in the bag, bro. This game has a lot of shortcomings that prevent me from giving it the same praise I did to something like Enderall. The leveling system and gameplay fix some of the problems it inherited from Fallout 4, but not all of them. And even for many of the ones it does fix, it only fixes them temporarily in the early game. I think the story is too austere with how it gives out its exposition. Some quests make small choices out to be meaningful, and some quests have you make a choice before having any idea what you're getting into. Some of the factions are hit or miss. The ending is rushed, and the implications of the story are much more interesting than from the actual story as written. That's honestly a pretty short list of problems to have though. When the story does shine in its best factional moments and in its side quests, it stacks up to a professional Fallout game. In the creativity and design of its world, it exceeds them. The reality is that, like I said at the start, this game is a miracle, not just because it's out, but because it's good. And the best part is that they're not stopping here. The developers have already spoken a lot about future DLCs and content packs. I'm personally really excited to see if they do anything with the big dome and this mushroom area we didn't get to talk about. There's nothing much here, which leads me to believe that this was a cut content zone or something they have future plans for. I could totally see myself making another video on the DLCs once the first few come out. And based on the success of this mod, I have no doubt this is not the last we'll be seeing from this team as far as full games are concerned. That about wraps up what I have to say about it though. If you've watched this far and feel like doing me a favor, shoot a comment down below to keep the discussion going. There's a lot I didn't get to talk about in this game, and I'm curious to hear what other people thought about it. If you're really feeling like doing me a solid, you can sign up to my Patreon. Donations are scheduled to be per video rather than per month, so if my upload schedule keeps being like it is now, you're in for a deal. All paid members get access to the videos early, as well as behind the scenes updates and occasional other goodies like cut content or early script drafts. Oh, also, you get me to read your name out loud. Thank you very, very much to Adam Souza, Autumn Vector, Bastard27, Bear Van Helsing, Brooks a Babel, Dream Cream, It's Ducktastic, Jack Bradley, Jaden Graham, Mega Crunch, Michael Aversa, Mike Woods, Ryan Little, Scarlet D, Talia Modnell Hemke, That Other Kiara, Xanforian, and all the other names on screen now. Without you, this would not be possible. Thank you so much for watching.